World War I found its beginnings when Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by Bosnians with Serbian connections on June 28, 1914. Serbians wanted to kill Franz Ferdinand because he was a threat to making a Yugoslavia. Serbians stood up to Austria-Hungary because they knew that they had Russia as an ally. Kaiser Wilhelm II gave Austria-Hungary a blank check saying that Germany would help them in any way possible. Austria, knowing that they had German help, declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Soon after Austria's declaration of war, Germany declares war on Russia and France, which officially begins World War I. The Central Powers included Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottomans, and the Allies included England, France, Russia, and Italy.
In the time leading up to the U.S. formally entering World War I, it maintained its neutrality, hoping to benefit economically from the war. The U.S. had no real desire to enter World War I because of its strict isolationist policies and largely immigrant population. The United States hoped to benefit from the war, however, being a large supplier of goods to both the British and the French. In addition, the U.S. felt that they could not justify entering the war on the side of the Allies because Russia was despotic. Germany had gained extreme confidence by 1917 and declared that they would resume their policy of unrestricted U-boat warfare after having previously agreed to abandon the policy. Germany believed that they had made their navy strong enough to fight off U.S. forces and cut Europe off from its U.S. supply lines. In addition, in Russia, unrest over the failure to modernize and unhappiness with the war came to a pinnacle, leading to popular unrest with the Tsar and a want for his removal. The German resumption of unrestricted U-boat warfare, after agreeing with Wilson to end it previously, enraged the American public because the previous sinkings of ships with U.S. citizens aboard, like the Lusitania in 1915. The policy also acted as a sign of an act of aggression against the U.S. Unrestricted U-boat warfare not only threatened American lives, but it also threatened the American economy, which had been vastly improving as a result of massive trade with Britain and France. The strong isolationist policies of the United States still made the possibility of formally entering the war unlikely, although there was both cause and popular support. The fall of the Russian Tsar in 1917 was the action that directly led to the formal U.S. involvement in World War I. With the fall of the Russian Tsar, a provisional government was put in place to create the Russian Republic. Although short-lived, the U.S. could now justify war by calling World War I a war for democracy. There was no longer a despot in Russia, but Germany was still ruled by a king. The U.S. entrance into World War I had enormous effects politically, socially, and economically. Politically, the long-standing isolationist policies of the U.S. were dissolved. A small, fairly weak government was replaced with a large, powerful government that had control over most aspects of life. Socially, the U.S. came together as a nation to support the war. Everyone was expected to pitch in and do their part in the war effort. Additionally, many men were sent off to war, opening up jobs for both women and African Americans. The U.S. economy expanded like never before. The economy had started to take off because of increasing aid to England and France in the 19-teens, but with the entrance of the U.S., manufacturing for the war effort skyrocketed. The great economic times during the war, the money that the U.S. received in payments after the war, and the feeling of supremacy to go along with the new social and political developments led to an unprecedented prosperous time during the 1920s. People believed that their situations would only get better, and with the emergence of the middle-class wealth, the stock market soared. However, bad investments and a feeling of indestructibleness led to the stock market collapse and the Great Depression. The U.S. was only able to eventually emerge from the Great Depression as a result of the large, powerful central government that was established during World War I.
When the U.S. enters World War I, they initially provide the Allies with much-needed financial aid. The U.S. immediately provided Allies with naval power, even though the British had found out how to destroy the U-boats. The U.S. most importantly provided the Allies with a boosted morale, as now the Allies had more confidence that they could win the war. The German offensive that they took in 1918 was not successful because the American soldiers were just arriving, and the Allied counteroffensive allowed the Allies to win the war, mainly because of U.S. intervention. Germany decided to abandon its attempt at reinstituting unrestricted U-boat warfare because they realized the U.S. Navy had become too strong. The U.S. would not be able to land troops for close to 1 year, but would be able to help keep supply lines open. At the same time, Tsar Nicholas resumed his day-to-day duties and took some of his attention away from the military efforts. Nicholas enacted a temporary policy of fixing food prices, but maintained the impertinence of Russia staying in the war. The general population was pleased that they could now buy food, but the overwhelming death totals led to continued unrest, leading to the strong Bolshevik Revolution in October, which put the Communist Party in power, removing Russian troops from the war effort. As a result of these events, Wilson and much of Congress agreed to maintain their neutrality and to not enter World War I. Because the U.S. never joined World War I, the war would have turned out very differently. The Allies would have not received the increase in finances that they needed, and their morale would have been very low. The Germans would have gone on the offensive on the Western Front still. But because there was no additional American troops and no boost in morale, the Germans' offensive on the French would have been successful, and the Germans would have ended up winning World War I. The treaty would have included the Germans taking back the disputed land that they had with France, Germany forcing many harsh reparations and other forms of punishment towards France, Germany taking a few beneficial colonies from England and France in order to display their power and to expand their foreign markets, and Germany would have weakened the English Navy to give them more protection and power. There are further implications to Germany winning World War I. Germany would have become a much bigger world power, and France would have become weaker and would be forever in debt as a result of the reparations and paying back loans to America and England. And because Germany would have been very stable and prosperous after the war, everybody would have believed in and had faith in the government. As a result, a man like Hitler would have never been able to rise to power because he would lack any support. And if Hitler never rose to power, a Second World War would have never occurred. Also, there would be anger and rivalry between Germany and the Soviet Union, as Germany has very far-right beliefs and the Soviet Union has far-left beliefs. Germany and the Soviet Union would be the major powers in the world now, and if a war ever occurred, it would have been between Germany and the Soviet Union.
As a result of the U.S. not entering the war with troops of their own, the U.S. economy would have never taken off because there would not have been a need for rapid production of materials for U.S. troops. Jobs would have not opened up for women and African Americans in industry because men would have stayed at home in the States, thus delaying women's suffrage and the push for equal rights for blacks. Without the rapid industrialization, the government also would have never grown to be so large because there would have been no need to increase its powers for the purpose of quickness and efficiency in war. The continuous cycle of recession and then coming out of it would break, but in a negative way. The German victory would cut off a large portion of trade between the U.S. and Europe, the largest United States market. In addition, the Allies would be unable to pay back their war debts to the U.S. because of German reparations, thrusting the U.S. into extreme difficult economic times. The combination of a small central government that lacked the power to get the country out of the economic difficulties and the lack of foreign entanglements would have created a situation where the U.S. economy would not have been able to rebound. The government would lack the power to take drastic actions like raising taxes, creating inflation, or heavily supporting industry, and without foreign entanglements there would be no apparent need to produce production levels. World War II would have not occurred because Hitler would not have risen to power, giving the U.S. no reason to be involved in the European politics of the 1930s and 1940s. As a result of there not being a World War I, the tensions over European distribution would have failed to arise between the U.S. and Russia, leading to the avoidance of the Cold War. America would not be known as the world power it is today. The prosperity based on economics along with political and social equality would be unknown. There would be far more internal problems because of the lack of extreme prosperity, leading to an unrecognizable American society.